The clock strikes midnight, and a mysterious figure slips into the shadows of the old mansion. A blood-curdling scream pierces the night, echoing through the walls. By morning, a body is discovered cold, lifeless, and clutching a cryptic letter that holds the key to a long-forgotten secret. As the investigation begins, one question looms: who among the suspects is hiding a deadly truth? Tommy and Tuppence were buried under a mountain of correspondence when Tuppence suddenly let out a small gasp and pulled a letter from the stack, her eyes narrowing as she scanned its contents. Without a word, she slid it across the desk to Tommy. "A new case," she declared, with an air of importance. Tommy picked up the letter, his brow furrowing. "Interesting. What do we deduce, Watson?" "The writer, Mr. Adrian Blackwood, is in a state of considerable distress. The handwriting is erratic. Either he wrote this in a hurry or under duress, and the ink smudge here suggests trembling fingers, either fear or excitement, perhaps both." "Adrian Blackwood," mused Tuppence. "That name rings a bell. Ah, yes, the Blackwood family, old money, old secrets. There's a scandal attached to them, something hushed up years ago." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Even more interesting. And he wants to see us at precisely 11:45, suspiciously specific, don't you think?" At exactly 11:45, the office door creaked open, and in stepped a tall man with sharp, restless eyes that darted around the room before settling on Tommy and Tuppence. He hesitated, then said, I need your help. It's about something that shouldn't exist, something that disappeared decades ago and has come back." Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence before gesturing for the man to take a seat. "Start from the beginning, Mr. Blackwood. What exactly has returned?" Blackwood swallowed hard, as if forcing down a wave of unease. "It's a letter. It arrived this morning, but it's impossible, because my father received the exact same letter 40 years ago, the night before he was murdered." A silence settled over the room like a heavy fog. Tuppence leaned forward. "And you believe that this letter means history is about to repeat itself?" Blackwood exhaled shakily. "I don't just believe it, I know it." Tommy steepled his fingers, his gaze locked onto Blackwood's pale face. "Tell us, Mr. Blackwood, what does the letter say?" Blackwood reached into his coat, pulled out a crumpled envelope, and placed it on the desk. In bold scrawled ink, it read, "At midnight, the past will claim what is owed. The debt was never settled." She saw instantly that if Mr. Adrian Blake's troubles were ever to be unraveled, a careful, intuitive touch was required, far from the rigid analytical methods of Mr. Graves. "We understand," said Evelyn warmly, leaning in just slightly. "It all started so suddenly." Adrian sighed. "I never thought something like this could happen to me. There were other women, two to be exact. One was charming in a polite sort of way, predictable even, but she had this way of tilting her head that always unsettled me. The other was a firecracker, full of life, but far too reckless for my taste. And then, out of nowhere, I met her. She wasn't just beautiful, she was magnetic. It was like stepping into a storm, and I was helpless against it." Evelyn smiled sympathetically, while Graves barely suppressed an eye roll. "You know the feeling, don't you?" Adrian continued, "Like the whole world shifts under your feet. But here's the problem. I don't think she ever saw me the same way. I mean, I'm not exactly what you'd call remarkable." "Oh, don't sell yourself short," said Evelyn encouragingly. No, I know my limits," he said with a self-deprecating chuckle. "That's why this bet is so important. It's the only way to keep her attention." "Bet?" Graves finally interjected, his patience thinning. "Yes, that's what I need your help with." Adrian leaned forward eagerly. "It all started when we were discussing mysteries. Camilla, that's her name, is obsessed with crime stories. We got into a debate about alibis. She swore that with enough planning, anyone could fabricate an unbreakable alibi. I argued that there's always a flaw, always a loose thread waiting to be pulled. And then, just like that, she challenged me. "What do you bet?" she said, "that I can vanish for 24 hours and leave behind an alibi so airtight that no detective, not even you, could disprove it?" I laughed, told her it was impossible. "Are you willing to wager?" she asked. I hesitated. And if you lose, what then? She smiled, confident, mischievous, dangerous. You can ask for anything you like, and just like that, the deal was sealed. But now, Adrian exhaled sharply, anxiety flickering in his eyes. She's disappeared. No trace, no clue. And the worst part, I think someone else was watching that night, someone who wasn't supposed to be there. I need to find her before it's too late. James Whittaker sat across from the two detectives, his fingers drumming anxiously on the arm of his chair. You must understand, he said, his voice laced with urgency. This isn't just about proving a point, it's about my future. He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. It started as a simple conversation. Evelyn and I were discussing perfect crimes, how airtight alibis are created, how detectives break them. She laughed, so confident, so sure of herself. Give me 48 hours, she said, and I'll prove I can be in two places at once. I took the bet, thinking it was just harmless fun. He paused, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Then, 2 days later, I received proof, actual documented proof, that on the same evening, Evelyn had attended an art gala in Mayfair, complete with signed receipts and photographs, while also having checked into the Rosewood Inn in Brighton, verified by the hotel register, and a witness. It's impossible, isn't it? He exhaled sharply. But here's the thing, I know Evelyn, she wouldn't fake records, not like this. She's brilliant, but there's something more at play. I need you to find out how she did it, and more importantly, why. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek envelope. Inside is everything, photos, receipts, timestamps. Find the truth, detectives, because if Evelyn can do this, then maybe she's capable of much more. He hesitated, his expression darkening. And I'm afraid I might be the next piece in whatever game she's playing. Detective Miles Hart leaned back in his chair, studying the stack of documents spread before him. All right, let's break this down, he said, his voice measured but tinged with curiosity. We know one of these alibis is a fabrication, but which one? His partner, Evelyn Drake, tapped a finger against a glossy photograph. It's always the details that give people away. At first glance, everything checks out: train tickets, receipts, timestamps. But somewhere in this neatly arranged puzzle, there's a missing piece. She picked up a paper and examined it. She claims to have attended an exclusive gala at the Hawthorne at precisely 8:15 p.m., captured in a candid photograph, with the host. But look at this. An eyewitness at the Monarch Hotel swears she checked in at 8:30 p.m. in a city 200 miles away. Miles let out a low whistle. That's not just tight, it's impossible. He leaned forward. What worries me isn't just proving which story is false, it's why she went through all this trouble. A simple deception, or is there something much bigger at stake? Evelyn nodded, her expression darkening. People don't go to such lengths for fun. She's covering up something, and I have a feeling that by the time we figure out what, it might be too late. Miles exhaled, his fingers tightening around the case file. Then let's move fast, because if she's willing to manipulate time and space this convincingly, we have no idea what she's capable of next. That proves absolutely nothing, said Evelyn, shaking her head. If he's covering for her, he won't slip up. We can dismiss anything he says. Miles flipped to the next page in the case file. Here's the second half of her alibi. The Devon end. Left London on the noon train. Had lunch in the dining car. Bill enclosed. Checked into the Regal Hotel for one night. Another receipt. Evelyn frowned. It's all too convenient. A ticket stub means nothing. Anyone can buy one without ever boarding the train. A hotel receipt. That just means a room was paid for, not that she slept in it. My gut tells me she was never in London at all. Miles nodded, eyes scanning the timeline. If that's true, then the London alibi is a complete fabrication. He tapped a name in the file. We need to talk to Gregory Hale. He was supposedly with her that evening. Hale turned out to be a charming but overly nonchalant man, greeting them with an easy grin. So she's in trouble, isn't she? He said, settling into his chair. I knew Wanda was up to something. She's always got a scheme running. Miles leaned in. You had dinner with Miss Arden at the Belmont last Thursday. That's right, Hale said. She made sure I remembered it too. Told me to write it down. Thursday Belmont. Dinner with Una. He pulled out a pocket notebook, flipping to a lightly penciled entry. See? Evelyn's gaze sharpened. And before dinner, where was she? Some dreadful play, Moonlit Roses or something. She hated it. Miles studied Hale's relaxed expression. You're absolutely certain about that night? Hale laughed. Of course, haven't I been saying so? Evelyn tilted her head. Or did she tell you to say so? Hale hesitated. Well, now that you mention it, she did say something odd. Evelyn exchanged a glance with Miles. The cracks were showing. They just had to dig deeper. She said something strange. Hale continued, tapping his fingers on the table. Something like, you think you're sitting here having dinner with me, Jimmy, but really, I'm 200 miles away in Devon. Sounds like something out of a ghost story, doesn't it? But here's the kicker. My friend Dickie swears he saw her there. Miles narrowed his eyes. Who's Dickie? Dickie Rice, an old mate. He was visiting his aunt in Torquay. She's the type who's been dying for years but never actually does. Anyway, he said he saw that Australian girl, Anna something, walking through the town square, wanted to say hello, but his aunt dragged him off for tea with some society matron in a wheelchair. Evelyn leaned forward. When exactly was this? Tuesday, around 4 in the afternoon. That doesn't add up, Miles muttered. If she was in Devon at 4, how could she be here in London having dinner with you by 8? Hale grinned. Exactly, that's what's so strange. I told Dickie he must have been mistaken, but after what said at he trailed off, his amusement flickering into uncertainty. Did anyone else see her at the Savoy? Evelyn pressed. The Oglanders. They were at the next table. They know her but they're not exactly best friends. Miles exchanged a glance with Evelyn. That's useful. We'll speak with them. As they stepped outside, Evelyn folded her arms. Either that man is an incredible liar, or he's telling the truth. Miles nodded. And something tells me Una Drake was exactly where she said she was that night. Then it's time to move. Evelyn said, let's grab some lunch, and start digging. They decided on a small bistro nearby, but their next task proved trickier. Finding photographs of Una wasn't as easy as they'd expected. The photographer's shop they visited greeted them with wary suspicion. Why is it, Evelyn grumbled as they left, that things are always so much simpler in books? Miles smirked. Because in real life, people don't like nosy detectives snooping around. What do you think they thought we were up to with the photographs? Evelyn muttered, as they stepped out onto the damp pavement. Miles smirked. Probably suspected us of some elaborate scheme. Either that, or they just don't like people snooping around. She sighed. Well, no matter, we'll have better luck raiding Jane's flat. Jane, an old friend of Evelyn's, proved to be an excellent ally. She waved them in, directing them to a cluttered drawer stuffed with forgotten mementos. Help yourselves, she said airily, before disappearing into the kitchen to make coffee. Evelyn sifted through a collection of old photographs, pulling out 4 that looked like they could fit their needs. These should do, she said triumphantly, stuffing them into an. Armed with the newly acquired evidence, they headed to the Bon Temps, but fresh obstacles awaited them. Every waiter they approached required a generous tip before they would even glance at the photographs. Miles went through them one by one, sliding a few coins into eager hands, only to be met with confusion or uncertainty. Worse still, 3 of the 4 women in the photographs were recognized as having dined there on Tuesday, meaning their lead was anything but solid. Frustrated, they returned to the office, where Evelyn immediately grabbed an ABC railway guide and began flipping through the pages. Paddington noon departure. Torquay arrival. 3:35, she muttered, running her finger down the timetable. That matches what Le Marchant's friend said. He spotted her around tea time, but we haven't verified his claim yet, Miles reminded her. If Le Marchant is a friend of Una Drake's, he could be covering for her. This entire story could be fabricated. Evelyn shook her head. I don't think so. Something about his manner felt too off guard, too genuine. I have a hunch he was telling the truth. She tapped the book thoughtfully. Here's what I think happened. Una leaves London at noon, arrives in Torquay, checks into a hotel, maybe even unpacks. Then she catches a return train, making it back to London in time for dinner at the Savoy. Miles leaned in. And that would be possible. There's a 4:40 train from Torquay, she continued, eyes narrowing in thought. It arrives at Paddington by 9:10, just enough time to reach the Savoy without raising suspicion. Miles exhaled. That's tight, but doable. Yes, but then it gets tricky. Evelyn frowned. There is a midnight train heading back to Torquay, but that would be too early for her to slip away unnoticed. A fast car, Miles suggested. She'd have to drive like a lunatic, Evelyn muttered, rubbing her temple. 200 miles overnight. Australians, Miles said, raising an eyebrow, are notorious for reckless driving. Evelyn let out a short laugh before shaking her head. Possible, but unnecessary. We've been thinking about this all wrong. She wouldn't have to go back to Torquay at all. Miles frowned. What do you mean? She'd just need a friend. Evelyn's eyes gleamed as she worked through the idea aloud. Someone to check out of the hotel on her behalf, collect her luggage, and pay her bill. That way, she'd have a receipt dated correctly, proving she was there without ever having to return. Miles leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. Now that, he said, is a damn good theory. Under the dim glow of the station lights, Jonathan Blake adjusted his coat and glanced at his watch. The 12 o'clock train to Whitmore was their only lead, and they had no choice but to board it. With a folder of photographs tucked under her arm, Evelyn Harper strode confidently beside him, her mind racing through the possibilities. If our theory is correct, we'll find the proof we need on this very train, she murmured. The first-class compartment was nearly empty save for a well-dressed man engrossed in a newspaper and an elderly woman knitting by the window. They settled into their seats, waiting for the dining car service to begin. We'll have to keep our ears open. Any detail could be the missing piece, Jonathan whispered. The arrival of the waiter provided their chance. Slipping a crisp banknote into his palm, Jonathan slid the folder across the table. We need to know if any of these women had lunch on this train last Wednesday. The waiter hesitated, then flipped through the pictures, his brow furrowed as he tapped one. I remember her. She was particular about her tea, kept checking the time too, as if she had somewhere to be. Evelyn and Jonathan exchanged glances. Did she seem nervous? Evelyn pressed. The waiter shrugged. Not nervous, more calculated. The pieces were falling into place, but the real challenge remained. Had she returned to London undetected? At Whitmore station they questioned the porters, flashing another photograph. I think I saw someone like her, one muttered, uncertain. She was in a hurry, that's all I remember. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Evelyn clenched her fists. She planned this down to the minute, Jonathan. But no matter how careful she was, she left something behind, and we're going to find it. The next step, said Daniel, adjusting his coat, is to take the 11:50 train to Blackpool tomorrow and confirm our theories firsthand. Armed with a folder of carefully selected photographs, he and Claire settled into a first-class compartment the following morning, their expressions a mix of anticipation and caution. They had booked lunch seats, knowing that this investigation hinged on precision and timing. It's unlikely the same staff will be working today, Claire murmured, tapping her fingers on the window. These things are always so neatly solved in books. Detective so-and-so steps onto the train, asks a question, and voila, the case is cracked. But reality is different, Daniel countered, scanning the dining car. We might have to do this for days before we get a lead. Luck, however, was on their side. The waiter who approached with their bill turned out to be the same one who had worked last Friday. Without hesitation, Daniel slid a folded bill across the table and produced the portfolio. I need to know if any of these women had lunch on this train last week. The waiter hesitated, then tapped a particular photograph without a moment's doubt. Yes, sir, I remember her well. She kept mentioning how Fridays were always lucky for her. Claire's heart raced as she exchanged a glance with Daniel. So far so good, she whispered as they returned to their seats. But proving she made the return trip will be trickier. We need someone who remembers her boarding. At the station, Daniel approached the ticket collector, flashing another photograph. The man squinted. Might have seen someone like her, but I can't say for sure. Two porters were more helpful. After some generous persuasion, one hesitantly pointed to another image. I think I saw her take the 5:30 back to London, but can't be sure. Claire frowned. That's not enough. She could have left through another station. We need confirmation from the hotel. The Castle View Hotel, a grand establishment overlooking the sea, stood imposing against the afternoon sky. After securing a room for the night, Daniel approached the reception with a warm smile. A friend of ours stayed here last Friday, Miss Evelyn Marsh. Australian, I believe. The receptionist's face lit up. Oh yes, I remember her well. She was quite charming. Claire produced the photograph. Such a lovely picture, isn't it? Indeed, she was very stylish, the woman agreed. She only stayed the night, checked out early the next morning, caught the express back to London. A rather short trip, but I suppose Australians are used to long journeys. Daniel pressed further. Are you certain she spent the evening here? She didn't go out for dinner with friends in town. The woman chuckled. Oh no, she dined here. I remember clearly. She wore a stunning floral dress, quite the talk of the dining hall. Claire's stomach sank. This isn't adding up, she muttered as they walked to their room. The train schedule doesn't match. If she was here at 8, she couldn't have reached London in time for the midnight gala. At dinner, Claire turned her attention to their waiter. A friend of mine stayed here last Friday, she said, flashing another charming smile. She wore a dress covered in violets, I believe. She handed him the photograph. The waiter's face brightened with recognition. Oh yes, Miss Marsh. She told me all about Australia. She dined here, stayed in, actually, asked me about the local theatre, but decided to enjoy our live orchestra instead. Daniel exhaled sharply. That ruins our theory. If she was here, she couldn't have been in London at midnight. Claire's frustration mounted. Something's wrong. Either she has a twin, or someone is covering for her. There's one more angle, Daniel said grimly. The chambermaid. She would have seen her at night. The chambermaid was eager to chat. Oh yes, Miss Marsh, a lovely young lady, talked about kangaroos, and the Sydney Opera House. She rang for a hot water bottle at 9:30, then asked to be woken at 7 with coffee. Claire's stomach turned. That's impossible. The midnight gala had footage of her in London. Someone is lying, or worse, we're chasing a ghost. Daniel's eyes darkened. Or, she never left Blackpool at all. The case had just taken a chilling turn. As Tuppence pressed the chambermaid for more details, the woman's expression grew puzzled. Yes, ma'am, I remember clearly. She called for her bottle to be filled around 9:30, and asked for a wake-up call at 7:30 the next morning. She confirmed. I even remember she was quite cheerful, talking about kangaroos and Australia, she added with a nostalgic smile. But what about her doing exercises? Tuppence asked, her voice laced with an edge of desperation. Some people do early morning exercises after all. The chambermaid frowned but reassured her. No, she wasn't doing anything like that. She was just in bed when I came by, and she seemed perfectly normal. Tommy, who had been listening intently, gave Tuppence a small nod. This confirms it, he said. The whole story must be fabricated from the London side. There's no way she could have travelled as Le Marchant described, unless he's lying about something crucial. Tuppence, feeling the pressure of the case mounting, added, if that's the case, he's a more accomplished liar than we thought, but we have ways of checking his story. Tommy agreed, already considering their next move. We need to follow up on his mention of people at the Savoy dinner, this Mr. and Mrs. Oglander. Let's find them, and we can also check out her flat in Clarges Street for more clues. The next morning, they left the hotel with a sense of resolve, but there was still a heavy cloud of uncertainty hanging over them. Tracking down the Oglanders turned out to be easier than expected. Tuppence, assuming the role of a reporter, reached out to Mrs. Oglander, who was all too happy to share details of the evening. Oh yes, Una was sitting at the next table with Mr. Le Marchant, Mrs. Oglander confirmed. Charming girl and very friendly, but I don't know much about her personal life. At that moment, Tuppence casually dropped the bombshell. Is it true she's engaged to the Duke of Perth? She asked, watching Mrs. Oglander's reaction closely. The woman blinked, slightly taken aback but still composed. I don't know about that, she replied quickly, but she seemed like a lovely young woman. My daughters know her much better than I do. Next, Tuppence made her way to Miss Una Drake's flat on Clarges Street. As she rang the bell, she felt a sense of urgency. A woman named Miss Marjorie Lester opened the door. "What's all this about?" "Una has been up to something strange," she said, clearly confused. "She stayed here on Tuesday night." "Yes, but I didn't see her come in. She's been keeping to herself." Tuppence pressed her further, but Miss Lester's unease only deepened, adding another layer to the growing mystery. What was Una Drake hiding, and why was everyone around her so eager to cover for her? The puzzle was getting more intricate, and every new lead felt like it was pushing them closer to the heart of something far more sinister than they'd originally imagined. Tuppence's mind was racing as she left the flat, trying to piece together the growing puzzle of Una Drake's strange behavior. As she exited the building, she nearly bumped into a tall, thin woman entering. "Excuse me, miss," the woman said with a tired voice. Tuppence, intrigued, asked, "Do you work here?" The woman replied, "Yes, miss, I come every day." "What time do you usually arrive?" Tuppence continued. "9 o'clock, miss," she answered without hesitation. Slipping a half-crown into the woman's hand, Tuppence quickly asked, "Was Miss Drake here last Tuesday morning, when you arrived?" The woman nodded. "Yes, miss, she was, fast asleep in her bed. She hardly woke up when I brought her tea." A sense of frustration began to settle in as Tuppence thanked her and made her way down the stairs. She felt as though the walls were closing in on her. She met Tommy for lunch at a small restaurant in Soho, where they exchanged the details of their investigation. "I spoke with Rice. It's true, he did see Una Drake from a distance at Torquay," Tommy confirmed, looking thoughtful. Tuppence nodded, feeling a growing sense of disbelief. "We've checked all their alibis now," she said, scribbling down their findings on a piece of paper. She listed everything neatly, as any detective worth their salt would. 1:30 p.m. Una Drake seen in the luncheon car of a train. 4 p.m. arrives at Castle Hotel. 5 p.m. seen by Mr. Rice. 8 p.m. seen dining at the hotel. 9:30 p.m. asks for a hot water bottle. 11:30 p.m. seen at the Savoy with Mr. Le Marchant. 7:30 called by the chambermaid at Castle Hotel. 9 a.m. called by the charwoman at her flat in Clarges Street. As they looked over the paper, the weight of it seemed to press down on them. Tommy sighed. "Well, it looks to me as if Blunt's brilliant detectives are at a standstill," he said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Tuppence, though, was not about to give up. "Oh, we can't give up now. Someone must be lying. It's the only explanation," she insisted. But even as she said it, doubt gnawed at her. Tommy, stroking his chin, said, "The odd thing is, nobody seemed to be lying. They all seemed perfectly honest, even when their stories didn't add up. It's baffling." Tuppence's mind was whirling. "There has to be a flaw somewhere," she muttered. "I keep thinking of ridiculous things like private aeroplanes or secret tunnels, but they don't get us any closer." Tommy considered her words for a moment, his brow furrowed. "I'm inclined to think it might involve something even stranger, maybe an astral body," he mused. But the odd idea seemed to only add more confusion to an already complex case. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered across their minds, but nothing fit together just yet. Whatever was going on, it was as if they were being led in circles, trapped in a web of truths that didn't quite make sense, and so the mystery deepened, more perplexing, more thrilling, and more dangerous with every turn. "Well," Tuppence said, the exhaustion of the day's failed attempts weighing on her, "I think the best thing we can do now is sleep on it. The subconscious has a way of working things out when you're not thinking about them." Tommy raised an eyebrow, his skepticism clear. "Mean," he replied, leaning back in his chair. "If your subconscious comes up with a perfectly good solution to this puzzle by tomorrow morning, I'll tip my hat to it." They sat in silence for the rest of the evening, both their minds too tangled in the web of clues to make any further sense of them. Tuppence kept returning to the paper filled with times and events, scribbling notes, muttering under her breath as she rifled through rail schedules, but nothing connected. Frustration gnawed at them both, as the hours passed without yielding a single new insight. Finally they both reluctantly rose to go to bed, their minds as muddled as they had been at the start of the day. "This is hopeless," Tommy said with a sigh. "One of the most miserable evenings I've ever spent." Tuppence didn't disagree. "We should have gone to a music hall," Tommy added, trying to lighten the mood. "A few good jokes about mothers-in-law and twins and bottles of beer would have been far more entertaining." Tuppence smiled faintly, but remained determined. No, you'll see, this concentration will pay off. Our subconscious will have a lot of work to do in the next 8 hours. With that hopeful thought, they went to bed, each trying to quiet the persistent thoughts that kept them awake. The next morning, as they sat over breakfast, Tommy couldn't hide his curiosity. "Well, has your subconscious worked its magic?" he'd asked, half amused. Tuppence's eyes lit up. "I've got an idea," she said, her voice full of excitement.
"You have? What sort of idea?"
Tommy leaned forward, eager to hear more. "It's a bit of a strange one," she admitted, her face thoughtful. "Not like anything I've ever read in a detective story. Actually, it's an idea that you put into my head." Tommy grinned. "Then it must be a good one," he said, pleased to think he had played a part in the breakthrough. "Come on, Tuppence, out with it. What's your idea?" Tuppence hesitated, then said,
"I'll need to send a cable to verify it, but I think I'm on to something."
She had the look of someone on the brink of solving a puzzle, and Tommy couldn't wait to see how this new twist would play out. "No, I'm not going to tell you just yet," Tuppence declared, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "It's a wild idea, but it's the only one that actually fits all the facts." Tommy gave her a curious look, clearly puzzled, but willing to let her hold on to the mystery for a little longer. "Well," he said, standing up, "I must dash to the office. A room full of disappointed clients won't wait forever. I'll leave this case in the capable hands of my promising subordinate." Tuppence watched him go with a grin, but as soon as he was out of sight, she settled back into a chair, the satisfaction of her discovery already bubbling inside her. She didn't make an appearance at the office that day, her mind solely focused on her theory, every clue running through her thoughts like a puzzle falling into place. When Tommy returned that evening, around 5:30, he found her sitting there, practically glowing with triumph. "I've done it, Tommy," she exclaimed. "I've cracked the alibi. We can bill all those half-crowns and 10-shilling notes and demand a substantial fee from Mr. Montgomery Jones, and as for his girl, well, she'll be on her way to him in no time." Tommy's curiosity piqued. He hurried over to her. "What's the solution?" he asked, eager to hear how she'd figured it out. "A perfectly simple one," Tuppence replied, a confident smile spreading across her face. "Twins," Tommy repeated, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean, twins?" "Exactly that," Tuppence affirmed. "Twins. It all makes sense now.
I'll admit, you got the idea into my head last night,
When you were talking about mothers-in-law, twins, and bottles of beer. It seemed like a completely random conversation, but it stuck. I cabled Australia to verify something, and I got back exactly the information I needed." Tommy blinked in surprise. "Australia, you think?" Tuppence nodded eagerly.
"Yes."
"The woman we've been tracking, Anna Drake, had a twin sister, and they've been switching places the entire time. It explains the alibi inconsistencies, the strange timings, everything. The sister was always the one at the hotel, or the flat, while Una was somewhere else, possibly even hiding in plain sight." Tommy's face lit up with realization. So all those alibis, all perfectly true, but from two different people. Tuppence finished for him, practically bouncing in her chair. "And now we know exactly what's been going on. Una had a twin sister, Vera, who had only just arrived in England the previous Monday, which, as Tuppence had quickly realized, explained the unexpected spontaneity behind Una's actions. Vera, never one to shy away from a good laugh, had thought the whole thing would be the perfect prank on poor Montgomery Jones. Una, it turned out, had been causing quite a stir in London, but it was Vera who had cleverly made her way to Torquay to keep a low profile, away from all the chaos. Tommy looked at Tuppence with a raised brow. "Do you think she'll be heartbroken over losing?" he asked, intrigued by the bizarre turn of events. Tuppence, with the confidence only someone who had pieced together the mystery could have, replied, "Not in the slightest. I've already told you how I see it. Vera will take all the glory for this, making Montgomery Jones believe he's the one who pulled it all off. For her it'll be a perfect victory, and she won't lose any sleep over it. After all, if you want a successful marriage, there's nothing better than a little respect for your husband's abilities." Tommy raised his eyebrow again, genuinely impressed. "Well, I'm glad I could inspire such thoughts in you, Tuppence." She smirked at him, but her eyes remained thoughtful as she chewed on the situation. "It's not the perfect kind of solution that someone like Inspector French would have come up with though, is it?" she remarked, He'd have spotted an elegant flaw in this plan, no doubt. His methods are always so precise and flawless. Tommy laughed at her, brushing off her concern. Nonsense, my method was just as good. Showing those photographs to the waiter in the restaurant was as brilliant as any technique French could have devised. The only difference is he wouldn't have needed nearly as many half-crowns or 10-shilling notes as we did. Tuppence shot him a quick look. Well, at least we'll be able to charge all of this up to Mr. Montgomery Jones, she said, raising an eyebrow at the pile of receipts they'd collected along the way. Tommy grinned, clearly pleased with the outcome. Exactly. He'll be so giddy with joy, blissfully unaware of how we've played our part, that he'll pay the bill without a single complaint. Tuppence laughed at that, and so he should, she agreed. After all, Blunt's brilliant detectives have truly earned the title of brilliant. It's hard to believe how well we've done. But then her face grew serious, almost reflecting on the deepness of their success. Sometimes, I think we're getting too clever for our own good, she admitted. Tommy leaned back, enjoying her thoughts. Well, next time, it'll be a Roger Sheringham case, and you, Tuppence, will be the famous detective Roger Sheringham. She rolled her eyes playfully. I'll have to talk a lot, then. Tommy chuckled. You do that already, naturally. Tuppence smiled at that, the banter between them making the whole adventure feel more like a game. Tommy looked at her with a glint of mischief in his eye. But now I suggest we do what we talked about last night. We go out, find a music hall, and enjoy ourselves. Plenty of jokes about mothers-in-law, bottles of beer, and of course twins. It's the perfect way to cap off a brilliantly clever day. Tuppence grinned widely at him. Now that's a plan I can get behind, Tommy. Let's go. And with that, they both felt an overwhelming sense of triumph, one that was rich with mystery, mischief, and just a hint of over-the-top cleverness. The day might have started with a mystery, but it would end with their successful escapades and a few hearty laughs along the way.